actually believe us?
Like I said, plus he's probably already heard about what's happening. Rumor. Maybe he'll even give us a reward.
What's going on, my phenomenon? Keep Phenom here, bringing you part 11 of my playthrough of part 2 of Guardian, or my second playthrough of Guardians of the Galaxy on PS5.
I think it adds to the charm of the place.
Hopefully you've been enjoying watching me play it. If you have, as always, like, comment, and subscribe.
It's really what he is, right?
Without further ado, let's get back to it.
For a second. So we can look at the MCU as it exists right now, and we can say that, like, everything we've seen in the last 10 years, right? Like, since the release of Iron Man 1, running all the way up to the events of Avengers Endgame, that's the MCU version 2, right? I mean, it's the second version of the MCU. Before that is MCU version 1. We don't know what that universe looked like, but we can go ahead and grab the comic book version of Galactus and throw it into the MCU and say that in that Marvel Cinematic Universe version 1, that there was a space explorer named Gallon, and he was, traveling around the cosmos because the universe was coming to an end, and he couldn't figure out why. And he basically failed to find out. He never really discovered what the cause of the universe's destruction was. Instead, what ended up happening is that in the universe's final moments, when it was about to end, it was literally crushing in on itself in this big crunch, that the version of eternity from the first universe merged with Galactus, and then, or I guess merged with Gallon, and then he kind of went into this sort of this cocoon, more or less. And so that when the universe was born into the Marvel Cinematic Universe version 2, the one that we've been watching for the last 10 years, Galactus was born along with it. And Galactus sat in this cocoon for like billions and billions of years, right? Like But what he was doing was basically understanding his energy, figuring out how his power worked, and then sort of designing a suit that would essentially regulate all those energies, so that once he emerged, he would go because of the fact that Galactus is a being of pure energy, he's a mirror to whoever sees him, right? So if Galactus shows up on Earth, he'll look like an Earthling. If Galactus shows up on the Kree homeworld, he'll look like a Kree. If Galactus shoes up on the Skrull homeworld, he'll look like a Skrull. That's one of the things that came out of the trial of Reed Richards. It kind of tie back around to the first question, right? Why didn't Galactus act during Infinity War and Avengers Endgame? People will look to the idea of Infinity Gauntlet and they will say, well, he acted during that story. Right? Like during the events of Infinity Gauntlet in the comics, Galactus stepped in and along with the other cosmic entities tried to defeat Thanos. But the motivation between Thanos in the comics and Thanos in the movie are split. Right? In the comics, all he does is he's a nihilist. Right? He's like, he's just death. It's not reduction, right? And what he approached death and destruction as a cause of death. When he got the Infinity Gauntlet, the perspective of Adam Warlock was, by coming back to the Earth, he's going to try to destroy everything they want. We have to stop the wall. In the movies, it's totally different. It's not really about him using this or that. He's not really a nihilist. He's really like a fatalist.
Celestials existed before the dawn of creation, and before the six singularities that became known as the Infinity Stones. The prime celestial, Orisham, created the first sun and gave light to the universe. More so, Orisham's main function within the universe is to aid in the birth of new celestial beings that will, in turn, bring about more life to the universe. Known as an endless cycle of destruction and creation, according to Orisham, without the Celestials completing this process, eventually the entire universe would be plunged into darkness and die. Orisham's desire to assist young species in their evolution was done in order to aid each world in a process known as the emergence. Every million years, new Celestials must be born. To that end, Orisham would plant a celestial seed of life within a planet. In Earth's case, it was the celestial Tiamat. In order to grow, a celestial would lay dormant in the core of the planet, feeding off the energy of sentient, intelligent life. The quantity of life required depends upon the species, but we know that after all human beings were brought back from the decimation, Earth had reached the necessary required energy to allow Tiamat to be born. To aid in this process, Orisham created two races of beings. First came the Deviants, a race of beings designed to help kill off predatory species on thriving young worlds to allow life to better evolve. However, as time progressed, the Deviants became the predators themselves and forced Orisham to create another race of beings to eradicate them, the Eternals. The Eternals were a race of synthetic beings whose main function was to protect life from the Deviants and assist in the development of early young species. The full scope of a Celestial's abilities are not known yet. However, we have seen a staggeringly powerful array of abilities at their command. They can manipulate cosmic energy to give birth to life and create matter. We've seen Celestials create stars and full galaxies from essentially nothing. Additionally, we know that they can travel over incredibly far distances almost instantaneously through teleportation. Another Celestial we know quite a bit about is Ego, the living planet. Ego's kind of a strange Celestial within the MCU, as he seems to be a bit of a renegade in his own regard. Ego states that the first thing he recalls is drifting completely alone within the void of outer space. It's unknown if this is how he originated from his own emergence or if he was created through alternate means. Considering his vast age compared to other Celestials, he may have been the byproduct of experimentation on how to create new celestial life before Orisham landed on his current methodology. Or Ego could be the same age as Orisham and they both came into existence around the same time. It's unknown. After drifting endlessly for millions of years, Ego began the process of building a world around his consciousness and created a biological avatar for himself that could leave his planet and go out further into the cosmos to
Alright,
search
let's
for
get
life.
back.
This avatar needed to come back to Ego's host planet periodically to recharge. After finding additional life and being unimpressed by what he found, Ego decided to embark on his own grand design, the Expansion. Ego decided to seed extensions of himself within worlds with sentient life, thereby terraforming these planets into extensions of himself. However, Ego wasn't strong enough to do this alone and needed the power of another Celestial to complete the expansion. He tried unsuccessfully to mate with various beings across the galaxy in order to create new celestial life, and eventually it was determined that his son, Peter Quill, had the necessary traits to assist with the expansion. However, Ego's plan was stopped by the combined might of the Guardians of the Galaxy
What
and
about
the
Rocket and
Ravagers.
Groot?
For more
About
information,
them.
Ego's
They
check out
left.
the video on
What
how
am I supposed to do?
powerful
Chase them
Ego
down and
is.
beg them to come
We've
back?
also seen other brief glimpses of Celestials throughout other events in the MCU. The Collector described the
Apologize?
Celestial
To him?
his son, the Searcher, used an Infinity
If
Stone to
Rocket
destroy
doesn't
the
come back,
world
we'll need a
effortlessly.
contingency plan for getting
Despite
rid
the
of
fact that
Megatron.
Celestials are essentially gods within the Marvel Universe, they can be killed. We have seen
We
this
could
happen
still pay the fine.
But we'd have to go all the way to New Xander.
During the Eternals, Cersei
What if we
was
get
able
there
to put
and
the
compromise
emergent
the
Tiamat into a
There's
form
gotta be
state
someone
using a
shady enough in the
tremendous
market
amount
to
of
help.
energy created by
Maybe.
forming a
But Cosmo
unified
deals with
other
Nova Corps all the
Eternals.
time.
When
Maybe we could
Orisham
pay the fine
created
through
the
him.
Eternals, he imbued their bodies with infinite cosmic energy in order to keep them ageless. The Eternal Phastos was able to create bands that allowed Cersei to gather the power of others and use it to stop the birth of Tiamat. Ego is killed by much less spectacular means when Rocket creates a massive bomb out of Anulax batteries. However, keep in mind that Rocket can create weapons that destroy
Spaceport
moons,
seems
and the
busier than
Anulax
normal.
batteries are some of the most powerful sources of energy in the universe, capable of
Galactic
powering
War
the
was
entire
over 12
planet of the
revolutions
Sovereign.
ago. And we're still
Lastly,
waiting for
we
it to
see
fall out.
Ego killed within the Marvel What If series by Ultimate Ultron using the power of the Infinity Stones, which makes sense. They are pretty strong. And the last element of celestial activity and death we've seen within the MCU is the lawless outpost known as Nowhere. Nowhere is the severed head of a dead Celestial. Some have speculated that this Celestial is Jemiah, seeing as there's a bar within Nowhere named Jemiah's Booth. However, Jemiah is also shown in Eternals creating a star, so it's difficult to know for sure. It's unclear how this Celestial was killed. I anticipate that we will find out one day what led to his beheading, but we do know that hundreds of years ago, the Tibian group set up mining operations within the skull in order to harvest the valuable resources within. The remnants of celestial bone, brain tissue, and spinal fluid all became insanely valuable resources on the galactic black market.
I will rock.
And that is about it for Celestials within the MCU as of right now.
I mean,
Hopefully we continue to learn more about these beings within the MCU, as I think they offer a ton of awesome lore to explore within this universe. Now, if you're interested in the Celestials, feel free to check out our videos on the comic book history of Eros, an Eternal of the planet Titan, introduced at the end of Eternals. Also, check out our video on the Eternals versus Avengers to see what we think would happen if these two juggernaut teams came to blows. And lastly, feel free to follow us on Twitter in order to learn what videos and projects we're working on for the future. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot. This has been Nick with Key Issues, and remember the motto, Celestials over
Didn't think
everything.
I'd miss Nowhere this much.
Attachment you feel to certain places, people, sometimes unexpected.
That's surprisingly profound, Jax.
Eight, 9, 10. 10 rings. Huh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Well, I suppose that's one way to get me to care about this movie. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, where we've always been with you, watching, guiding, making you cringe, and seeing you accomplish wonders. Like the time that you managed to pick up the phone without screaming the number first. That was truly miraculous. So get this, Eternals is the last MCU feature film to not be a part of an existing series or a property that's been adapted before. That is kind of crazy when you think about it. The company's announced this massive plan for movies 3 and beyond, and yet none of them are actually original. And honestly, based on the negative early reception to Eternals, yeah, they probably won't want to be taking that chance again anytime soon anyway. It's kind of like the YouTube top 10 creator tool that measures each of your last 10 uploads. Ooh, Endgame, #1 upload. Not surprising, but good to see. Shang-Chi, solid, performing on average. Eternals, 10th place. Ooh, by a lot. Wow, not great. Gotta follow that one up with a banger so the channel doesn't die. Fire up a Spider-Man! Anyway, regardless of quality or public response, it legitimately makes Eternals pretty darn special. Add to that the fact that it was written and directed by double Oscar-winning director Chloe Zhao, a self-described Marvel Comics fan who was originally approached by Marvel to direct Black Widow, but after passing on that project, sold them her own pitch to make this movie. Again, pretty cool. You'll notice, however, that one key thing I'm avoiding talking about, and that's the plot. Because, well, I don't get it. And yeah, that about sums up a lot of the internet's initial reactions to this movie days after its release. This is a weird movie that takes a lot of risks. After all, this is a movie that's full of philosophy, morality, and the nature of human existence. And usually, if someone in a Marvel movie asks, why are we here? The answer is obviously to punch that bad guy. And then they do, and then Spider-Man makes a movie reference, and one of the older guys with goatees does the sarcasm reaction. And then one of the funny, sincere characters does the deadpan reaction. And one of the serious mother figures goes, boys, and everybody laughs. But not in this movie. In Eternals, it's suddenly, yeah, but no, seriously, I'm feeling existentially unmoored about the nature of my place in the universe, and I think we should take a long break in Act 2 to talk this thing out. If nothing else, this movie will go down as Marvel's first uncomfortable sexy time scene. Yeah, parents, there's a spoiler alert for you. Surprise! They're nudie and doing stuff in a Marvel movie. I'm sitting there watching this on opening night, and the parents as audience are all collectively stiffening at the same time as they frantically tried to decide how to deal with their kids sitting next to them. It was a palpable uncomfort in the audience. Gonna have a fun time explaining that one to the kiddos on the way home. In short, Eternals, for winding up as a quote-unquote lesser Marvel movie, actually gives us a lot that we need to talk about because of what it's trying to accomplish, outside of getting me to buy a Lexus, that is.
Go for Kingo. I'm almost there. Parking.
The Avengers wouldn't be late.
Exhilaration is eternal in the first ever V8 Lexus IS 500.
This one film completely rewrites the entire history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while also upending the future of where things are headed. And not just in the usual way Marvel movies tend to, with some brand new person showing up in the middle of the credits and saying his catchphrase where half the theater goes, "Oh, he said the thing!" So let's actually talk about some of the more exciting stuff, starting with what I think is the most interesting and important reveal of all. Eternals proves that Thanos was right again. Alright, so without recapping the nearly 3-hour runtime of Eternals, I'm just gonna focus on the stuff that you need to know. The Earth is pregnant.
Isn't it obvious, Morty? I'm the planet.
In the Marvel Universe, what humans consider gods are actually massive cosmic space creatures called Celestials, who we've actually seen before in the MCU via the Guardians movies. Peter Quill's dad, Ego, in Guardians the Galaxy 2.
What are you exactly?
I'm what's called a celestial, sweetheart.
This big guy during the Collector's speech in Guardians 1.
Observe.
And the giant skull where the Collector's base is, nowhere. Yep, that's actually a Celestial head. Anyway, the Celestials' main thing is mucking around with evolution with the help of their lab assistants, the superhuman robot Eternals, and the ugly monster Deviants. And this is to help them survive. You see, it turns out that the Celestials reproduce by laying their eggs inside the core of planets, because the life cycles of living beings evolving for generations provide them the billions of years worth of energy that they need for those eggs to gestate. And Earth has one of those eggs. The Celestial Tiamat is inside of Earth, waiting to be born, which would be cool, except for one teeny tiny detail. When the newborn Celestial hatches, it destroys the planet and kills every living thing on it. So yeah, Earth is suddenly on a doomsday clock, or would be if it hadn't been for everyone's favorite giant purple raisin man, Thanos. In what might be the darkest implied twist in the Marvel Universe yet, it turns out that before Earth's mightiest hero saved the universe from Thanos, Thanos saved Earth from the Celestials. Apparently, the emergence of Tiamat was on schedule to happen a few years ago, but got delayed because something cut the population of the universe, and thus the egg's power supply in half. In half, you say?
Perfectly balanced. This whole thing should be.
And when the Avengers assembled to snap everyone back into existence, suddenly Tiamat was back on the clock to hatch, which, wouldn't you know, is the main threat of this movie. And that's not the only way that Thanos helped out either. The eventual pulling together of humanity to undo the snap turns out to be the tipping point that gets a member of the Eternals to turn against their master and stop the emergence. So does that make Thanos Earth's mightiest hero? Kinda, yeah. Sure, the Avengers saved half of humanity, but Thanos literally saved the entire planet. Adding insult to injury, the fact that the Avengers undoing his work puts Tiamat once again on the fast track to hatching, that only strengthens Thanos' case. But here's where things get really interesting. Was this intentional or not? Did Thanos know what he was really doing when he snapped everyone away, or was this just some lucky coincidence? I think that there's a case to be made that he knew what he was doing, but maybe he couldn't articulate it. Let me explain. It all starts off with 3 key lines from Infinity War. First, listen to him describe the fall of Titan.
Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution. They called me a madman. And what I predicted came to pass.
Notice that he says extinction here, and it's kept very vague. We assume the extinction is related to the planet's lack of resources, since that's what he's talking about. But what if the extinction was coming from another source? A celestial source, feeding on those too many mouths. Because there's another line earlier about the nature of the planet Titan, and it feels off.
What the hell happened to this planet? It's 8 degrees off its axis. gravitational pull is all over the place.
Titan isn't just a dead planet where people died due to a lack of resources. It's a planet that has been fundamentally altered. As Peter Quill points out, the gravitation on the planet is weird. It is somehow off its axis. That sort of cosmic change doesn't happen just because a planet runs out of food and water. That comes from a celestial popping out of this thing like a giant Kinder egg. Something more happened on Titan that we didn't think to question way back then. Something that, I suspect, even Thanos himself might not have been super sure about.
If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. It needs correction.
You don't know that!
I'm the only one who knows that.
Remember that? Throughout Infinity War, we get Thanos talking about how he predicted that Titan was doomed, that he was sure a similar fate was going to happen to other planets, including Earth, and that he needs to snap away half the population. But we never get why he has these predictions, only that he's the only one who's smart enough to see the inevitable. Given what we knew about him at the time, he just seemed to be a committed Malthusian zealot concerned about resource management. But now, with Eternals, I think we have another explanation. Thanos actually did know all of this stuff because he himself was a malfunctioning Eternal. During the credits for Eternals, we're introduced to, well, first we're introduced to probably the worst CGI in a Marvel movie ever, Pip the Troll. Woof! Was it just me, or did the dialogue just not match up with this guy's lips at all? The CGI effects here were like I was watching the Star Wars Special Edition. Anyway, Pip's the hype man for a character named Eros, also known by the nickname Star Fox.
Do a barrel roll!
Yeah, that joke's not gonna get old. And we're told that, just like in the comics, Eros is also an Eternal, who is also Thanos' brother, which seems to suggest that Thanos himself was an Eternal. Okay, so let's talk about Thanos and Eros for a minute here. In the comics, they didn't originally have anything to do with Eternals or Celestials, but then a retcon came along which did make them part of the Eternals. In fact, that was part of the explanation for why Thanos was the Mad Titan. He was psychologically traumatized from being bullied as a kid because even though he himself was an Eternal, he'd been born with a recessive gene that made him look more like one of the deviants, i.e. that's why he's huge, purple, and, you know, the whole washboard chin. Whereas Eros was not only traditionally attractive, he has, no joke, the power to make you sexually attracted to him. A villain for the Me Too era if I've ever seen one. In short, we have the movie outright naming Thanos as the sole reason the emergence was delayed, thereby saving Earth for 5 extra years. We have comic evidence showing Thanos was an Eternal, as well as an end credit scene that suggests the exact same thing. So the pieces are lined up to prove that Thanos knew what he was doing all along. Why then was he going around talking about limited resources rather than, hey, I'm doing this because you're all gonna die when the space egg hatches? Well, I propose to you that he knew, but also kinda didn't know. In Eternals, we learned that Angelina Jolie's character Athena came down with an Eternal-specific mental illness called Madwiry. This caused her to have apocalyptic visions and lash out at her teammates. Midway through the movie, it's revealed that these moments of madness are actually glitches in her programming, when she gets to see glimpses of the team's previous planetary destructions. What if this, or something like it, is what happened to Thanos? Think about it. If he and Eros are also Eternals, it stands to reason that he could have had a similar breakdown, or had similar visions revealing the truth about what's really going to happen when the world's population reaches the done mark, but maybe not a complete or coherent vision. So his interpretation of what he saw and felt became militant population balance, instead of, hey guys, what if we're actually a growth machine that feeds a giant star child living inside the planet? Why else would Madwiry be a plot point in an already overstuffed movie like Eternals? So that's a theory looking backwards. Thanos was right yet again. But for good measure, I wanted to include a short theory looking forwards as well. When confronted about the nature of life and death in the universe by Cersei, you know, real casual conversation there, Arishem talks in pretty stark terms about how if the Celestials don't keep on cultivating the cosmos, everything will fall to darkness. Now, in the comics, the actual how and why of the Celestials changes all the time, but a consistent thing is that they're old as heck, representing the emergence of the first light energy in the universe. Therefore, they are enemies of emptiness and darkness on the cosmic scale. And in the Marvel Comics universe, cosmic darkness isn't just a what, it's a who. You see this guy? His name is Null, and I'm thinking Eternals just set him up as one of the MCU's next big cosmic bad guys. In the comics, Null is supposedly the embodiment of darkness, a creature of pure, absolute evil and destruction who seeks only to destroy all light, life, and existence. That makes the Celestials his ultimate enemies, and he's been trying to kill them off ever since they first appeared. The big floating head Nowhere from the Guardians movies, like I mentioned earlier, that used to be a Celestial, and Null was the one who did the chopping, using his weapon, All Black the Necro sword. A sword that would later fall into the hands of a character named Gore the God Butcher. A character that, wouldn't you know it, is about to be played by Christian Bale in the upcoming Thor movie, Love and Thunder. Now, this weapon in particular is interesting because it's so much more than a sword. It's actually established to be a living parasitic organism that's existed for billions of years. In fact, in the comics lore, it's the first and most powerful symbiote ever made. With All Black by his side, Null assembles his first true army, the symbiote race. Huh, that reminds me, who just got zapped into the MCU during a post-credit scene? Oh yeah, Venom and Eddie at the end of Venom 2. What coincidental timing. And this isn't just me pulling at some loose threads either. In the end credit scene with Dane Whitman, we see him reach for a sword and the glassy black polish on the blade starts to shimmer and jump towards his fingertips in a way that is not too dissimilar from the way symbiotes react in the Venom movies. Now, let me make this clear. I'm not saying that that sword is all black. It's more likely to be the ebony blade, a sword that's actually hinted at earlier in the movie when Thena's practicing her swordsmanship. But even still, all of it, from the mention of cosmic darkness to the sudden appearance of symbiotes to a living blade, heck, even the ebony blade itself is also traceable to Null's war against the Celestials. For Null. Because here's what I think is the most interesting takeaway of all this. I don't think we saw the good guys win in Eternals. Cersei herself questions whether stopping the emergence was the right move, and honestly, I don't think it was. Regardless of the value of humanity, which honestly the movie itself is kind of split on, the actions of the Eternals in this movie were short-sighted, saving one planet at the expense of billions. That, coupled with our hero's quest to let the other Eternals know the truth about their existence, sets in motion a series of dominoes that definitely looks like it's gonna wind up killing off a bunch of Celestials, opening the door to an era of darkness, an era of Null. But hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We all know the Marvel movie that we're all really excited about is Spider-Man No Way Home. Even as I write this, it's trending on Twitter with like 100,000 tweets that a new Spider-Man poster just dropped with "Da-da! Green Goblin from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man." Well, you guys can catch up on that first appearance of that iconic villain literally nowhere here in the US. You actually have to pay full price to rent it or buy it wherever you're going to try to stream it. But it is available to stream over in Netflix Germany, which you can access thanks to our sponsor for today's episode, NordVPN. Did you know that there are global databases that tell you where in the world movies are available to stream on Netflix? With websites like that, plus Nord, you actually have unstoppable watching power. As Disney puts more and more of its movies behind Disney Plus, it's getting harder and harder to find their stuff streaming on services that you might already own. But I can tell you, thanks to sites like these, movies like Iron Man are still available to stream in only 2 countries, Germany and Spain. But with NordVPN, 2 countries, 1 country, doesn't matter. That content is still only 2 clicks away. With Nord, you can open up an entire world of content that's otherwise inaccessible to you at your specific location. With over 5,400 servers across 59 countries, you can essentially unlock a never-ending streaming library. Nord is the trusted online security solution, used by over hundreds of thousands of internet users worldwide, myself included. With NordVPN, your info stays safe behind a wall of next-generation encryption. It masks your IP so you can keep your browsing to yourself. So absolutely nobody will be able to see all the dumb things that you're Googling from day to day. Not even Nord. With their strict no-logs policy, they don't track, collect, or share your private data. Your business remains your business. And as a sponsor for today's episode, Nord is offering you theorists a huge discount on their 2-year plan, plus an additional 1 month for free. And they've made it incredibly easy to sign up. Literally all you have to do is head over to nordvpn.com/filmtheory. Or even better, just click the link in the top line of the description to take advantage of Nord's worldwide servers and ensure your privacy online. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring today's episode, and as always, thanks for watching. We've watched the show, we've seen the strategies, we know the memes. But has anyone actually stopped to ask the question, could a death tournament like Squid Game actually be legal? Sure, there are people dying for cash, which immediately seems illegal, but then again, those contestants signed a contract. They even opted their way back into the game after voting to exit, knowing full well that their lives were on the line. Not only that, but the whole thing is taking place on an island that belongs to, well, we don't know who it belongs to, but is it outside of legal jurisdictions? Can it be? So again, I ask the question, could the Squid Game be legal? Let's just say that the answer isn't as clear-cut as you might expect, and may come up in a big reveal for Season 2. Internet, welcome to Film Theory, where today I'm taking a brief time out on the Squid Game to introduce Theorist Holiday merch. It's cool and warm at the same time, and has some of our most unique pieces ever, including this neon green switch case, this incredible satin souvenir jacket, black and white joggers and t-shirts for when you're doing your best impression of a piano, and if you need to stay warm, boom, quilted jacket. Need to layer up with something a bit lighter? Boom, asymmetrical hoodie that was actually designed by a member of the film theorist community. No joke, they actually submitted this design as fan art over on the Game Theor subreddit. I loved it so much that we reached out to her, purchased the design, and here it is now, translated into an actual article of clothing. Not only is this one of my favorite design pieces that we've just done from a design standpoint, but to know that it came from a member of the community makes it all the cooler. Ah, this one makes me so happy. It's like walking around in a big old hug. And for the truly loyalist of loyal theorists, don't forget to bring it all home with an incredibly snuggly 4-channel fleecy blanket. This thing is perfect for game night, or, you know, on those occasions when you're Netflix and chilling and the action on screen gets a little bit too intense for your eyes. Squid Game is pretty mature, so hide from the action on screen with this blanket. There is so much more too that I haven't even mentioned, but most importantly of all, we ordered all of this merch well in advance to avoid all the supply chain issues that are happening right now for the holiday season. So when you order, you're gonna get your gifts fast so they can appear under the tree and you can use them all year. That said, the other side of that coin is once we're gone, we are just out. It is very, very hard to order stuff right now and get it in a reasonable amount of time, so if you are interested in any of these items, I encourage you to get it immediately because the supplies are extremely limited. And that's not me doing the whole like artificial scarcity, oh no, you gotta get them before no, we just ordered what we thought we could sell, and so, you know, if one item tends to do really well, it's just gonna go, and it's gone. Anyway, this stuff is gorgeous. The materials are so high quality. Everything is stitched in. It's an incredible lineup of merchandise. If you guys have ever bought Theory wear from us in the past, you know how high quality it is, how long it lasts, and how much we care about the designs that we're putting into your hands because we see it as an extension of all the things that we do on YouTube, and it's really important for us to get it right, and we think that you are gonna love it. You will love it. So check it out in the merch shelf right below this video. Pull it up in a new tab. Take a look after this video is done. I thank you so much for your consideration. Now back to Squid Game. Obviously, Squid Game needs no introduction at this point. I mean, the premise of get a bunch of people together on an island and pit them against each other in a series of playground games in order to survive just sells itself. It is the most watched Netflix series of all time. It's like on that Bird Box, it caused a huge surge in demand for honeycomb candy, pink jumpsuits, and white slider shoes, and it's prompting internet creators from all over to make their own versions of the game. Squid Games in Minecraft, Squid Games in Roblox, on TikTok, Squid Games with friends, and before the end of the year, my buddy Mr. Beast is doing his own version with 453 contestants all competing with the 6 games from the show. Now, obviously, that's not going to be real, but it prompts the question, could it be? In other words, Jimmy and the rest of the team aren't creating real death games, but if some aging, super wealthy bored guy dying of brain cancer wanted to arrange something exactly like this, complete with the death, would there be a legal way of doing it? After all, they signed a contract waiving their legal rights, so does that make the death game legal? What are the limits of contract law? Can you legally consent to a death game where the rules might result in you plunging to your death? Well, believe it or not, but the question of whether you can legally consent to a death game is something that has actually come up in real life. It sounds crazy, right? Like, who's looking into this case law? But it's come up in numerous cases in the US, specifically with games like Russian roulette, which, disclaimer, is a terrible idea, disclaimer, and should never be attempted ever. Flashing warning lights, awful, awful, stupid, stupid, dumb, don't do this. So basically, it's game is not the right word. It is a stupid, dumb, stupid thing where a single bullet is loaded into an empty chamber of a gun, it's spun and randomized, people then take turns pulling the trigger until the gun fires. Loser is the one who dies. Now, like I said, some really stupid, dumb people do this, and they actually wind up dying. But in an interesting legal twist, the other individuals involved in that game get convicted for manslaughter, even when the person who died is pulling their own trigger and doing so voluntarily. Participating in, let alone running a death game, is not legal, even if everyone who's involved knows exactly what they're signing up for. Which means 2 things. First, that players voting themselves back into the Squid Game doesn't make things any more legal. You see, in Squid Game's second episode, after learning that losing any individual challenge means death, the participants vote to end the game, only to realize that the real world back home isn't that much better than Murder Island. As a result, many contestants voluntarily choose to come back in for another chance to play. From that point forward, they're back of their own volition, knowing full well the sort of game that it is and the incredible stakes that are on the line. But all of it doesn't matter. The games are going to be illegal regardless. But you know what that decision does change? It suddenly makes every participant guilty. For the first game, it could be argued in a court of law that the players didn't know what they were signing up for. Who would have suspected that they'd be transported off to a remote island in the middle of nowhere and forced to contend with a sniper-powered motion detector? No one. That would have clearly been like their, second or third guess as to what was going on? At that point in the show, they would have all been innocent. But coming back willfully knowing that this was a game where their fellow competitors were gonna die, suddenly they're guilty by association. Their actions are perpetuating the game, just like in the Russian roulette example, and they're indirectly, or sometimes even directly, getting other people killed. And that meets the definition of manslaughter. Even our hero Gian, who actively tries to avoid killing anyone throughout the series, guilty. Were he to alert the authorities about the illegal death games, his winnings would be seized immediately, and he'd likely have to go to court to answer for all his crimes. Over here in the US, manslaughter equates to anything between 3 and 20 years in prison. So over 400 counts of manslaughter for all the failed contestants? That's 1,000 years in prison. Sorry, Gian, you're not going to need that fancy new hairstyle in the lockup. The US actually has a lot of specific laws around things like games that involve violence and the threat of injury, given our nation's history of illegal pistol dueling as well as other legal but still violent sports like boxing. That said, all of those specific rules generally fall under a few basic legal principles that apply almost universally, and would almost certainly apply to games hosted in South Korea, like we see in the show, or EU member nations, or pretty much any country on Earth. One of those overarching guiding principles is that you can't legally authorize a contract for illegal activities. I mean, nobody's stopping you from printing out a piece of paper and signing your name on it, but the entire point of a contract is to protect all the parties involved. For example, in Ohio, where I grew up, there are hot wings restaurants that have certain items on the menu that require you to sign a waiver before you'll be allowed to order them. If I were to order that menu item and then try to sue the restaurant for damages after I spent the next day on the toilet, they could just point to the contract and say, look, this guy knew what he was getting himself into. It's not our fault that his bowels are currently erupting like Mount Vesuvius. But you see, that agreement wouldn't protect them against any criminal charges that would be held against them, like criminal negligence or reckless endangerment, which are crimes that you go to jail for. For example, even if I signed the waiver saying I consent to whatever you give me to put in my mouth, the restaurant can't knowingly serve me expired food, or rat poison, or other things that would violate health codes and or actually pose a serious threat to my life and safety, regardless of whatever legalese they put into that contract. Doing stuff like that is just illegal, and no amount of putting it on a piece of paper and getting other people to sign it is going to make it any more legal. The long and short of it is that no contract is going to change the fact that illegal things are just still illegal. You can't consent to getting killed for money. As far as I can tell, it's true of every country's legal system. The US, South Korea, anywhere else. But here's the real question that got me thinking. What if the murder games aren't taking place on South Korean soil? What if they're, as we see in the series, being hosted on a private island? As we've stated, this would be illegal in any country, but is there a way to escape national boundaries and host a death game such that those laws don't apply to you? Well, I sat down, did the research, and the question of what laws apply outside of national borders is actually a lot more complicated and also a lot more interesting than I expected. First off, going to your own remote island, even if it is privately owned, isn't going to legally help you. In fact, the term private island is kind of a misnomer. Yeah, you can have an island that's your own private property, but that doesn't automatically make it legal for you to do whatever you want there. I mean, think about it this way. I own a house. That is my private property, but that doesn't mean that I can just start cooking meth down in the basement. My so-called private property is still legally under the jurisdiction of the US government. The same is true for private islands. Every piece of land on Earth has been claimed by some nation. So what if you're not on land? How about international waters, the fabled high seas, where supposedly there are no rules because you're beyond the bounds of any nation? Well, first, you gotta get there. Nations not only own their land, but also govern the immediate water around them. The coastal waters of each nation are what are known as territorial waters, which, according to a 1982 United Nations convention, extend 12 nautical miles away from the coast. There's also an exclusive economic zone that extends 200 nautical miles, 370 kilometers, or 230 regular miles, because for some reason, nautical miles and just miles are different. Apparently that difference makes it easier to measure longitude and latitude. Anyway, beyond those 230 miles away from the shore, then you've reached international waters. And the idea of floating out into international waters to get away with your illegal death game isn't as outlandish as it might first seem. After all, many cruise ships have casinos that only operate when the ship is sailing in international waters. That seems like it should be a case of using the international waters loophole to circumvent the law, but it's not. You see, that's just a common misunderstanding. According to international law, any vessel at sea has to be registered to a country whose flag they then carry. If you fly a South Korean flag, you're governed by South Korean law. If you fly a US flag, you're governed by the United States law. So let's go back to the whole casino example. This isn't a matter of the law not applying to the boat, but rather different laws applying to the boat at different distances from the land. Once a ship crosses into the territorial waters of a country or state where gambling isn't allowed, those casinos on board need to be shut down, because now they're technically playing by that territory's rules. Out in international waters, the casinos are able to reopen because now the boat is following the federal laws of whichever country's flag they fly. But even in those international waters, you can tell that certain rules are still applicable. The casino is still closed to people younger than 21 in accordance with US law. Or if it's flying a flag from a country with more permissive gambling laws like the UK, then the casino could be open to people as young as 18. And by the way, you can't get around this by not flying any flag. In fact, not flying a country's flag makes you even more suspicious. And under international law, any other country's vessel can board your vessel, inspect it, and then arrest you when they see the mountain of corpses that have been piling up over the course of your death game. And even if nobody catches you while you're at sea, the moment that you pull into a port, well, then you can get arrested for any of the crimes that you've committed. Odds are that you're gonna have to pull up to port at some point for, I don't know, things like clean water, more eggs, tempered glass panes, some bleach to clean out the bloodstains from your uniforms. There's a lot of stuff you're gonna need to restock. And if your plan around that is, I'll just stay out at sea and have everything delivered to me, well, anyone who delivers is aiding and abetting you, and will then get the handcuffs slapped on them. Come on! Why can't a guy just do one simple thing? One simple thing like giving people the chance to get out of their financial destitution by forcing them to put their lives on the line while rich investors bet on the winners and losers like horses in a race. Ugh! This is why we can't have nice things. Fine, I can't do it on land. I can't do it in a vessel on the sea. What if I create my own frickin' country? After all, me and my poorly acted friends are rich. We're so rich and so bored that we spend our money doing stuff like this, so why not create a new island where we can continue doing stuff like this and not have to worry about some government coming to slap cuffs on us? Artificial islands are already a thing. Numerous countries, including Japan, the Netherlands, India, and Austria, have all created artificial islands. Most of them exist to serve as airports, but one of Japan's artificial islands is home to hotels, a convention center. They even have an IKEA. So what if you go out into international waters and build your own artificial island there? Can I build my own country that disregards all the rules? Create giant games of deadly tug-of-war? Build slides with no height or safety restrictions? Construct railings that have uprights that are more than a foot apart? Ooh, spooky and dangerous, but I can do it because it's my country and I can play by whatever rules I want. And you see, now we're getting somewhere. This is actually a topic that's seriously being discussed today. In fact, it's the basis of a movement known as seasteading. This idea has been floated by organizations like the Seasteading Institute, as well as private companies like Blue Seed, which aim to float a ship near Silicon Valley that would allow entrepreneurs from around the globe to gather and work on startup businesses without being at the mercy of the visa system and taxes. A project that I gotta say sounds like the most Silicon Valley thing ever, and also one that's been on hold since 2013 due to, quote, insufficient funding. Come on, you're telling me that no tech billionaire has the money to get this thing off the ground, literally because it's gonna be out in the water? Jeff Bezos, where are you at, bro? I guess he chose space over sea. And you see, there might be a good reason for that. The question of whether you can start your own country and get recognized as a sovereign state is an absurdly complicated topic, with tons of legal implications that remain unanswered on account of nobody actually making a serious effort to do that sort of thing. But luckily, we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty about that today, because we only need to know one basic and simple fact. You can't escape international law by starting your own country. There's such a thing as universal jurisdiction that covers certain universal crimes, like human trafficking, torture, and other human rights violations that you can get arrested for while traveling through international waters. The entire point of this is to designate crimes against humanity as a set of standards that everyone is held to, even if a country might define them as illegal on their land. In the past, these universal jurisdictions have been invoked to hold military leaders responsible for war crimes, or hold government officials accountable when they're responsible for acts of genocide. So, death game? Yeah, it's not gonna fly. Having your participants sign a contract doesn't work. Buying your own private island doesn't work. Taking to the high seas doesn't work. Even creating your own country doesn't work. But there is still one final option here, and this one sadly does work. And that's being so powerful that the rules don't apply to you. Everything that we've talked about today is the way that things should be, but sadly, as I existence of international law and universal jurisdiction and things like that, plenty of countries still commit human rights violations and get away with it. Even though we'd expect things like universal jurisdiction to allow organizations like the UN to intervene in cases of human abuse, the grim reality is that actually going in and arresting the officials responsible is sometimes impossible without risking wars that would result in many more deaths, especially when nuclear powers are involved. Case in point, North Korea continues to commit numerous human rights abuses, something that the United Nations Human Rights Council has spent years investigating, with a recent report in 2020 based on 100 first-hand accounts. This is the kind of thing that universal jurisdiction provisions under international law should prevent, but don't, because North Korea, as a nuclear power, is able to get away with it. Now, when it comes to heavy subject matter like this, I'm always going to hesitate to draw comparisons between fictional stories and real life, because I don't want to do it in a way that's going to trivialize the death and suffering of real people, but I do think in this case that it's actually reflective of one of the central themes featured in Squid Game. Regardless of how illegal something might be, the people responsible for torture, death, and absolute brutality can get away with it simply by how powerful they are. By having a character from North Korea who participates in the Squid Game specifically because she wants to help her family escape from the brutal regime, the show is directly drawing attention to that. In fact, given how willing the show has been to address this topic in season 1 by prominently featuring a North Korean defector as one of its central characters, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we were to find out in the inevitable season 2 that the games are actually held on an island under North Korean jurisdiction. Well, there is no legal loophole that I could find that would make the Squid Games legal. The real world has shown us that it doesn't matter how illegal your actions are if you're operating under the authority of certain corrupt regimes. And given their track record, it wouldn't surprise me to see North Korea turning a blind eye to the ultra-wealthy organizing games where people are killed for sport as long as they get to see a cut of that money. Setting the games on an island under North Korean jurisdiction not only logically makes sense from a geographical, plot-based, and world-building standpoint, but it would also fit in with the themes that the show is already exploring in its first season. And that, my friends, is the sad and complicated truth of the Squid Game. While it might seem stupid to ask the question of could something like this be legal, the real-world answer to that actually matters a lot, because it's happening around us each and every day. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And just one final reminder that merch is available right below this video. If you are interested at all in getting more film theorist-specific merch, that amazing asymmetric hoodie designed by a member of the film theory community is available right now. If you want to see more film theory merch down the line, showing your support for that item actually tells us, hey, people want to wear their film theory pride, because up till now they've just really liked the neon green and black, and so we've leaned in on that. But support film theory, friends. That's your item. And as a reminder, if you order early, you'll be sure to get that before the Christmas season, which is, you know, difficult to do nowadays for a lot of people, but we've taken care of that in advance. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Here, Matt Pat?
Oh, hey Mickey. I'm just curling up with a warm cup of cocoa, reading this listicle about famous products that are actually ripoffs. These keep getting suggested to me ever since I made that food theory episode about how Oreos are actually Hydrox cookies. Hey, what's this one? This article says that Finding Nemo was actually plagiarized?
Does it now?
Well, apparently in 2002 there was a French children's book about a little clownfish whose father is killed and through an epic journey ends up reuniting with his mother.
Well, clearly you must be forgetting an important detail, Matt Pat. Nemo is all about a dying mother and the boy's quest to reunite with his father. Clearly different, haha.
Nikki, come on.
Look at the colors, Matt Pat. Nemo is clearly a different color.
They're both orange.
Are they, Matt Pat? Are they? Nemo is obviously slightly more red than this shark tail reject.
But apparently there's other stuff in here too.
Are you actually going to believe the clickbait, Matt Pat?
No, I'm gonna do the research. I'm not gonna sleep until I know the truth about this one, Mickey, no matter what it takes.
Well, fair warning, Matt Pat. You might not like what you find at the end of that journey.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, where if I was a fish, I'd be a bottom feeder. Speaking of bottom feeders, at least I'm not a lawyer. Haha! That segue was so seamless you didn't even see it. Wow, now that we're talking about lawyers, you know who gets sued a lot? Disney. In all seriousness, the old House of Mouse has been a frequent target for lawsuits over the years for reasons that have less to do with their guilt or innocence than with a simple law of economics. They's where the money's at. People aim their lawsuits at Disney for the same reason that bank robbers go after banks. Things go well, could be an easy payday. Of course, most attempts to sue Disney are also foiled for the same reason that most bank robbery attempts don't pan out. They can afford better security. Let's just say that when you're a $300 billion company with lots of lawyers and governmental connections, you have a lot of ways that you can protect yourself. So it makes it really unclear when Disney is actually doing something wrong versus when a lawsuit is just another shameless cash grab. Case in point, in 2003, our dear friend Mickey was actually a target of a lawsuit by a French children's author who claimed that Disney plagiarized the idea for his book, an idea that would eventually lead to the production of Finding Nemo. You know, the first Pixar film to win an Academy Award, one of the American Film Institute's 10 best animated films of all time, the movie that is the best-selling DVD in history, at the time the single highest grossing G-rated movie with a total box office just shy of $900 million. You know, saying that movie was stolen is kind of a big deal. Also, as a quick side note here, I should mention that in 2003, Disney didn't own Pixar yet, but it was the distribution company for the movie, so they were involved in the lawsuit too. It's just a lot easier to point to the rodent-themed mascot that serves as the face of corporate global domination instead of, you know, a silent jumping desk lamp. The story of the children's book author goes like this. In 1995, Franck Lecalvez claims to have come up with an idea for an animated film about clownfish. A simple, boy's father dies, a boy must go on an epic journey to reunite with his surviving mother story. As a guy in his mid-20s at the time, he was an aspiring filmmaker, and he claims that he pitched his idea to French production companies and animation studios, but no one bit. Get it? No one bit? Anyway, his idea lay untouched for half a decade until, in the year 2000, he finally decided to take his animated film concept and turn it into a children's book, Perrault le Poison Clown. Oh god, boys and clowns! Sorry, I misread that. It's Perrault le Poisson Clown. Perrault the clownfish. It's been a few years since I took French. For a minute there, I thought I had to be even more scared of clowns than I already am. Nope, the only thing I have to be scared of in this story are these lumpy clownfish illustrations that'll fuel my nightmares. Because no one believed in his story, Lecalvez self-published the book. Reportedly, he paid $71,000 to print 2,000 copies, and miraculously, he managed to sell them all to bookstores, though it's unlikely that he actually turned a profit. At $70,000 for 2,000 books, he was probably spending about $35 for each one, and considering that retail bookstores tend to charge a margin of around 40%, the only way that he would have made any money back is if the bookstores were charging over $58 a copy, which I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say was not the case. No children's book is worth that, especially when the cover looks like this. In other words, he was probably eating a massive loss on each copy sold, but hey, who am I to dissuade a man for pursuing his dream of being a children's book author with observations about the harsh realities of the economics of book publishing. Anyway, in 2002, Lecalvez finally got his idea out into the world, both by self-publishing a children's book and by registering his screenplay with the French Society of Authors, apparently unwilling to give up with his movie-making aspirations. At last, he was able to tell the story of a young clownfish who, after tragically losing one of his parents to an underwater predator, was able to reunite with his remaining parent after a marine journey. Life was good. So imagine how crushing it would be when the following year Disney and Pixar releases Finding Nemo, which shatters box office records and touts what seems to be a pretty suspiciously similar premise. For one thing, it's gotta be frustrating to pitch an idea to film production companies and get rejected, only for a movie with the same premise to become literally the highest grossing animated film of all time 8 years later. You know, peek behind the scenes, actually feel a bit of the sting. Actually pitched an idea that was roughly the video games that made us to Netflix, only for them to reject it and then see them do the exact same concept a few years later with the series High Score.
I don't know. 5 of my friends got Netflix deals. It's a very achievable goal.
Well, you don't have to rub it in, Summer. But as an added kick in the badly CGI'd gills, French bookstores started taking his book off the shelves because they thought that his 2002 children's book was ripping off the idea from the 2003 Disney film. In an interview with NBC News Today, Lecalvez explained, quote, "What's really upsetting is that quite a few bookstores won't sell my book because they think that I have plagiarized Nemo. This was the last straw. Lecalvez decided that if anyone was going to be throwing around accusations of plagiarism, it was going to be him, which led to the lawsuit in December 2003 where he claimed that Disney was the one who copied his idea, demanding that Disney give him a share of profits from all Finding Nemo merchandise sold in France. Given that Finding Nemo sold over 40 million copies of the DVD during its first 3 years on store shelves, with sale of toys on a specific cartoon mouse doesn't mean that they own the idea of talking cartoon mice in general. Disney's copyright covers Mickey, sure, but that doesn't mean that they can go after Warner Brothers for Pinky and the Brain or Speedy Gonzales. They own a copyright on a specific character. On the other hand, if you were to create a walking, talking mouse with red shorts, large yellow shoes, white gloves, and large circular ears, then you might come across a problem. Unless you were using him for parody purposes, which falls under fair use, which is what I did in the opening gag, so please don't sue us, Disney. The point is that when talking about copyright, if Lecalvez wants to claim that Disney's Finding Nemo infringes on his, he needs to prove substantial similarity. This is the legal standard in the US, and while EU countries like France sometimes sometimes use slightly different language like striking similarity, the basic principles tend to boil down to the same 3 requirements. First, you need to own a valid copyright. Second, you need to show that the person you're suing actually copied your work. And third, you need to prove misappropriation, meaning that the thing that was copied was substantial, either by copying a lot of your idea or by copying the core or heart of the work. The first item on the checklist, that you have a valid copyright, kind of a no-duh. Lekelvez not only owns the copyright on his children's book, but he also took the step of registering the copyright for the screenplay version of his story. The last point, misappropriation, is something that would also likely fall in his favor. After all, the central story of Perrault le Poisson Clown is about a kid clownfish who needs to reunite with his one surviving parent after his other parent is killed by a marine predator. That isn't some random insignificant detail, it is the heart of both of these stories. So that is 2 major items checked, but the part that gets a little bit harder to prove is that second bullet point, that Disney outright copied his idea. Now, as you can imagine, it's pretty difficult to prove that someone just copied your work, which is why courts often rely on the striking similarity test. If you can show that the quote-unquote copied version is so similar to the original that there's no way it could have come about by sheer coincidence, then you've met the standard. So are the similarities between Finding Nemo and Perrault le Poisson Clown close enough to meet the striking similarity requirement? Well, here's what Lekelvez's copyright lawyer had to say about the uncanny resemblance between the 2 characters. First, Nemo, like Perrault, is a clownfish with orange and white stripes who lives in a sea anemone. Now, that right there might sound like 3 points of similarity, but the reality is that all clownfish look like this. If you are going to create a story about a clownfish, then it naturally follows that he would look orange with white stripes. Likewise, clownfish just live in sea anemones. That is a fact. Pointing to these similarities as evidence of copying is like pointing to 2 zebra characters and claiming that one must be copied from the other because they both have black and white stripes and live in a savanna. They also claim that there were, quote, the same supporting characters in the film, such as a surgeon fish and cleaner shrimp, and gentle fish folk who help the little troubled hero. Now, if you're wondering about that surgeon fish he mentions, no, he's not referring to a fish doctor working on a high pay scale. Ha-ha! I'm sorry, I have a problem. No, they're referring to a family of fishes known in the scientific community by the name Acanthuridae, meaning tail spine. Dory, being a blue tang, is part of this family of fish, and one of Perrault's friends is also part of that same fish family. However, pointing to 2 fishes being in the same taxonomic family as evidence of copying, in scientific terms, is like saying that Mordecai from Cartoon Network's regular show must be a ripoff of the crows from Dumbo because blue jays and crows are part of the same bird family. If that sounds like a dumb stretch, you're right, it is, which is why I'm writing it down as a future theory idea. But seriously, it's kind of flimsy evidence, right? Likewise, the cleaner shrimp that they mention is just a common underwater animal. As for those gentle fish folk who help the little troubled hero, yeah, it's not gonna fly. Clearly, Disney must have copied my idea because my main character, who is a fish, meets other fish characters who help him on his journey. Obviously, though, the strongest point of comparison is with the beginning of the story. A clownfish parent dies, leading to a perilous journey where a kid reunites with his parent. That's hard to argue against as a direct connection, right? Yeah, you'd be surprised. Consider this. Disney has a long history with killing off its animal parents, be it Bambi in 1942, The Fox and the Hound, Brother Bear, Lion King. They practically invented the trope, so that alone is going to be pretty hard to defend. But making matters worse is the premise of both of these stories. Well, sure, they look similar on paper, they don't match up when you dive deeper. In Perrault, the young little clownfish is the one who has to go away to find his parent, while in Finding Nemo, it's the dad Marlin who goes on the grand adventure. And also, it's worth mentioning that the way both journeys play out is just vastly different. But Lekelvez's case gets even harder to defend when you consider the timeline of events. At first glance, it seems like his book, released in 2002, came before the movie, released in 2003. So clearly the one that came second must be the copy, right? But you as well as I know that animated movies take a long time to make. Finding Nemo was in pre-production way back in 1997. Even Lekelvez's copyright lawyer admitted that the film was finished by the time the book came out. In short, the only real piece of evidence that Lekelvez has to stand on is his own claim that in 1995 he pitched French animation studios about an idea for a movie about a lost clownfish. And personal anecdotes don't really hold up in court. And if that's Lekelvez's argument, that someone heard him talking about his idea in the 1990s and decided to make Finding Nemo based on that, then it makes no sense for him to talk about the visual similarities, since he didn't hire an illustrator for his children's book until years after he was already done pitching the idea. And surprisingly, the French court actually ruled that there were significant enough visual differences between the 2 characters. To quote a translation from the original French, Perrault appears longer and cylindrical, well, Nemo is in a range of red and Perrault in ranges of orange. One has scales, the other not. If the two characters are smiling, Nemo shows teeth and the smile is close to that of a human, while Perrault's mouth, toothless, resumes the smile attributed to certain representations of dolphins. One also looks like they put his model through a blender, but, you know, that's not my place to judge. So, is that the end of our story? Little guy loses because of the big corporation steamrolling over him? I mean, that's where most of the clickbait articles stop the story, so it must end there, right? No, my friends. The ruling of the French court found that there was something shady going on, and Disney wasn't the villain. See, everything that I've just laid out is stuff that the French court figured Le Calvez and his lawyer already knew, or at least should have known. The lawyer would have known that Disney would win the case. Le Calvez would have known that a movie couldn't have copied the look of his main character from a book published less than a year earlier. That's not me speculating, that is basically the legal conclusion of the French court, which ruled that Le Calvez knew about the existence of Finding Nemo when his own clownfish protagonist was brought to life by an illustrator. After all, Finding Nemo didn't hit theaters until 2003, sure, but previews of Finding Nemo were appearing on home video copies of Disney movies back in 2002. In fact, the French court's ruling went as far to say, quoting from the BBC, Nemo had existed before Perrault, and that Le Calvez knew of the Disney character when he created his. In short, this does wind up being a story about someone copying someone else's idea for a profit, but Disney wasn't the one doing the copying. Le Calvez tried to rip off Disney. He not only ended up losing his case, he was forced to pay a total of 61,000 euros, or about $100,000 in damages to reimburse Disney for the legal fees from his frivolous lawsuit. And here's the kicker, friends, to also pay for the cost of advertising the ruling, just to make sure that everyone knew that Disney was innocent in all of this. Le Calvez, I'll accept my paycheck now, please. Oh. I guess I'm not a part of that. In fact, if you start looking at the case from the standpoint of him being guilty from the start, like maybe this was a setup to be some kind of cash grab hoping to nab an easy payday from Disney because they would want to settle out of court and not make headlines, suddenly a lot of the weird details I told you about earlier start to make sense. Like the fact that he paid $71,000 to publish 2,000 copies of a book that would have been impossible to turn a profit on, or the fact that he waited until 2002 to register his screenplay despite supposedly trying to get his idea made into a film back in 1995. These moves make a lot more sense if you assume that he was already in the process of laying the groundwork for a lawsuit against Disney. And again, that's not me, that was the conclusion of the French legal authorities. I gotta admit, it feels a little bit weird to come down on Disney's side for this episode. After all, my natural inclination is usually to side with the little guy and not the $300 billion mega corporation. But if there's one thing that we're all about here on Film Theory, it's that you shouldn't always blindly trust your first assumptions. Just because someone looks like the scrappy underdog in a David versus Goliath story, it doesn't automatically mean that they're the good guy. And let's face it, these channels are always telling you that the villains might actually be the ones who were right all along, and today is honestly no exception. I cannot imagine anyone better to play the role of the villain, who may have just actually been right in this case, than Disney. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cuts. And hey, if you like this Finding Nemo theory, make sure you check out our two-parter where we expose Dory's secrets. We have solid evidence to suggest that she might just be faking her memory problems the entire time. Just keep subscribing, so that way new theories can swim into your inbox each and every week, and I'll see you all next time.
The Marvel Cinematic Universe is famously teeming with Easter eggs and references. Some of them are included merely for the fun of it, while others have led to bigger things in the franchise. For example, Stephen Strange was very briefly name-dropped in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and now Doctor Strange is a prominent member of the MCU's cast of characters. There have, however, been hundreds more, some of which are yet to be referenced again. This video will look into 10 such examples that could become relevant in the future. These MCU Easter eggs and references could definitely lead to bigger things. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's the best way of keeping up to date with all of Screen Rant's great new videos.
Odin's treasures.
Fake. This stuff in here is fake.
Odin's Trophy Room. In 2011's Thor movie, audiences were introduced to the wonders of Odin's Trophy Room on Asgard. It was featured in the movie because the frost giants of Jotunheim had gained access to it, courtesy of the traitorous Loki, in order to get their hands on the Casket of Ancient Winters, which they intended to use to bring their species back to its former glory. Of course, they were thwarted in their attempts to take it by the destroyer armor, which eviscerated them with its powerful energy blasts. But the scene revealed that Odin had a number of powerful items stashed away. Of course, the Infinity Gauntlet in there has since been revealed to be fake, but the Orb of Agamotto and the Eternal Flame were in there too, which ended up being Easter eggs for Doctor Strange and Thor Ragnarok respectively. With that in mind, the fact that the Tablet of Life and Time and the Warlock's Eye were also in there could turn out to be interesting. The Warlock's Eye, for example, could lead to the introduction of Harrokin, the leader of the Legions of Valhalla, as he is the most prominent character to have used it in the comics, and he'd be a fantastic addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he could very easily work alongside Hela in future movies.
Proceed to your designated vehicles for post-business evacuation.
Project Pegasus. In the opening scenes of 2012's Avengers movie, the setting was a S.H.I.E.L.D. base on which the Tesseract was being studied by Eric Selvig. Due to the fact that the aforementioned Infinity Stone was misbehaving, an evacuation was called that resulted in a lot of frantic movement within the base. In one scene, a soldier was seen ushering people towards the exit, and a sign was briefly on show behind him. On the sign, the words Project Pegasus were clearly seen. Those words were only on screen for a matter of seconds, but given the relevance of them in the comics, it seems unlikely that they wouldn't lead to anything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In the comics, Project Pegasus is an initiative that studies alternative sources of energy, in the same way S.H.I.E.L.D. were studying the Tesseract in the MCU, and it's associated with a number of prominent heroes. Its inclusion in the Avengers movie could have hinted towards the introduction of the likes of Quasar and Blue Shield, for example, as both of those guys have been head of security on the project, and Quasar, who is otherwise known as Wendell Vaughn, would be a particularly fantastic addition to the MCU Avengers. Grandmaster's Tower. 2017's Thor Ragnarok saw the Hulk as the champion gladiator on Sakaar in the Grandmaster's Tournament of Champions. The Grandmaster, played brilliantly by Jeff Goldblum, was the main man on the planet, with servants and bodyguards working for him, and he also had a tower built that was devoted to his legacy. On the side of his tower, the very recognizable faces of his former champions were sculpted, those champions being Bee-Beast, Man-Thing, Darkcrawler, Ares, and Beta Ray Bill. While the inclusion of some of those characters are nothing more than fun nods to the comics, you have to believe that at least a couple of them will lead to something bigger. Beta Ray Bill and Ares in particular would be fantastic additions to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Both characters are powerful heroes. Well, in Ares' case, he's an anti-hero, and they could provide some much-needed support to the existing good guys in the MCU. Their introduction could lead to some very interesting stories and concepts for the franchise. For example, Beta Ray Bill could become a member of a live-action Annihilators team, and Ares would mean the Olympian gods were coming to the MCU, and that really would be awesome.
This is the staff of the Living Tribunal.
The staff of the Living Tribunal. 2016's Doctor Strange movie featured many objects of power, both of a mystical and cosmic nature. Of course, the most prominent example was the Eye of Agamotto Infinity Stone, also known as the Time Stone, which was used to trap Dormammu in a time loop and reverse time to undo the destruction caused by the villain's dark dimension merging with Earth. Other items either seen or mentioned in the movie included the Evil Eye of Avalon, the Wand of Watum, the Staff of One, and the Vaulting Boots of Voltor, all of which could potentially lead to the introduction of characters or plots relating to them from the comics. However, the most intriguing item was the Staff of the Living Tribunal, which was essentially a mystical weapon similar to both a whip and a pair of nunchucks. Carl Mordo used and specifically named the item during a training scene involving the titular Strange. In the comics, the Living Tribunal is the second most powerful being in the Marvel Universe, behind only the one above all, who is essentially God. Should that item's inclusion in the MCU be hinting toward the character's appearance in the franchise, it would be absolutely incredible. He is powerful enough to shut down the power of the Infinity Stones. Make of that what you will.
We've housed the galaxy's largest collection of fauna, relics, and species of all manner.
The Collector's Museum. The Collector's Museum, which has been seen in the mid-credits scene of 2013's Thor: Dark World, as well as in 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, is a veritable treasure trove of Easter eggs and references to the wider Marvel Universe and beyond. The likes of Howard the Duck and the slugs from Slither were in there, but there were also countless other exhibits. A Dark Elf was on show, which could hint towards the return of the species that we thought were dead following the events of the second Thor movie. Cosmo the Space Dog was in there, which could indicate that he'll be joining the Guardians of the Galaxy in a future movie, just like he has in the comics, and there was a Zeronian in there, which could see the introduction of their planet and race in the MCU, and that, in turn, could see the powerful space parasite making an appearance. All that being said, there were countless exhibits in the museum that haven't even been identified yet, so the extent of the possibilities that could come from them is unknown. Thanos will be paying the Collector a visit in Avengers Infinity War in order to collect the Aether, and we may discover he's hiding some other potentially important items when that happens.
We'd only like to use you as a consultant. You can't afford me.
The SHIELD map. At the end of 2010's Iron Man 2, at the SHIELD safe house where Tony Stark was being debriefed by Nick Fury, there was a map in the background. On the map, there were a number of superhero hotspots highlighted. The location of the Hulk's battle with General Ross's forces was on there, the place where Mjolnir landed in the New Mexico desert was on there, a couple of locations pertaining to Captain America were on there, and Wakanda was highlighted on there, an Easter egg that only recently came into fruition, of course. But there's also another and that hasn't been explored yet, but it certainly could be. It's the location of Atlantis in Marvel's comic books, and if that's what it's highlighting in the MCU, which we believe it is, it could be foreshadowing the future introduction of Namor the Submariner to the franchise. Namor was one of Marvel's first heroes, and he's been a member of teams like the Avengers and the Illuminati, and his introduction could lead to some very exciting things happening going forward, especially now that Disney and Fox have come to a deal that might have otherwise made it difficult to have the character in the MCU.
Good evening, boss.
Jocasta. As of 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron, Tony Stark no longer uses Jarvis to aid him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's due to the fact that the well-spoken AI's interface was uploaded into Vision's synthetic body to create a powerful new character. That meant Stark needed a replacement, which turned out to be Friday. But as the genius billionaire playboy and philanthropist was looking through a collection of UI chips to find one, eagle-eyed fans noticed that one of them was labeled Jocasta. In the comics, Jocasta is the robotic bride of Ultron, who was responsible for her creation in that reality. Like Vision, however, she went on to betray him and become a member of the Avengers. Now that we know her AI exists in the MCU, there's every chance we could see her in the franchise, albeit with a new origin. This scenario would become more likely to occur if Vision dies and the Avengers feel the need to add a new android character to their team. Given that Vision's death is something that is strongly expected to happen when Thanos tears the Mind Stone from his forehead, you have to think there's a strong possibility that need will arise fairly soon.
The universe rotates on a 5,000-year cycle. And once a cycle, all the worlds align.
Eric Selvig's chalkboard. In 2013's Thor: The Dark World, Eric Selvig was revealed to have been driven mad by his experiences in the Avengers movie a year earlier. He had experienced having a god inside his head, after all. Selvig ended up incarcerated in a mental institution, but he was still doing astrophysicist stuff, which was epitomized by some doodling he did on a chalkboard. He put a lot of information down that eagle-eyed MCU fans were quick to notice, and a number of those things could be hinting at some major stories in the franchise going forward. There is a reference to the Fault, which is the rip in the fabric of the universe that leads to the Cancerverse, a concept strongly associated with the Thanos Imperative story arc. There is also a reference to the Crossroads, which is a dimension in Marvel Comics that consists primarily of portals to other worlds, which could very easily become prominent, especially given the potential links to the X-Men movie franchise going forward. The Nexus of All Reality was also on there, and that's a location in the Florida Everglades where parallel universes sometimes intersect. Essentially, these Easter eggs could be hinting at the MCU clashing with a number of alternate realities in the future. Mindless Ones. In 2016's Doctor Strange movie, when Caecilius and his followers were sucked into the dark dimension after Dormammu was defeated in the movie's climactic battle, they appeared to turn into dark, almost featureless beings with a single glowing red eye. Anyone familiar with Marvel's comic books immediately knew what was happening. They were being transformed into mindless ones by Dormammu. In the comics, the mindless ones were created by the powerful entity known as Plukta, as opposed to the flame-headed sorcerer, and they were made to be unstoppable engines of destruction. They're super strong, almost impossible to physically hurt, and they're capable of projecting extremely powerful blasts of energy from their eyes. When Dormammu was expanding his domains across the multiverse, the Dark Dimension and the Mindless Ones were certainly among his most prominent acquisitions. The Marvel Universe has a number of characters who can summon the Mindless Ones using magic. Dormammu is obviously one of them, and Doctor Doom is another, for example, and there's every chance that we could see them being utilized in the MCU by one of those characters in the future, now that they've been teased, and that could put the franchise's heroes in some real trouble. I see it. Eternity. The Guardians of the Galaxy movies are the first Marvel Cinematic Universe offerings to truly venture into the cosmos, so it's no surprise when Marvel's cosmic entities appear or get mentioned. The likes of the Collector, Ego, the Living Planet, and Isan the Searcher have all featured in the Guardians movies to date, but we could have seen another one hinted at in 2017's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. When Ego was revealing his plan to take over the universe to Peter Quill, he tapped him on the forehead and gave him a vision of sorts. Peter's eyes turned black and starry, and he said he could see eternity. He could have simply been referring to the fact that he could see beyond the edge of the universe, but he could also have been referring to the cosmic being known as Eternity, whose body, in the comic books, just so happens to be black and starry like Peter's eyes were. The character had previously been pictured in the first Guardians movie too, on the walls of the Temple Vault on Morag. If these things were foreshadowing the introduction of Eternity as a character to the MCU, it would truly be a spectacular thing to see.
So, King of Asgard.
Thor becomes king. Ever since Thor: The Dark World was released in 2013, Thor Odinson was on a quest to find his long-lost father, Odin. After finding out that Loki was pretending to be their father for several years, he demanded his help to seek him out.
I know exactly where he is.
They eventually found him on Earth with the help of Doctor Strange's magic and wisdom. Curiously enough, Odin within the comics has been sent to Earth before, something longtime comic book fans may have picked up on. Unfortunately, their reunion was short-lived.
Hey, take it easy, man.
As Odin passed away, and Thor essentially took up the mantle as King of Asgard. However, this is not the first time the eye-patched King Thor has appeared within Marvel Comics. The Thor God of Thunder storyline that was released during 2012 depicted an older yet more powerful Thor in the far future who had been King of Asgard for several thousands of years. This storyline pitted him up against the Devourer of Worlds, Galactus, who was on a mission to feed upon the long-dead planet Earth. To defeat the hungry giant, Thor had to obtain the insane power of the Necro Sword, which also has been referenced within Thor Ragnarok. Who knows? Maybe if the Fox and Marvel deal comes through, we may be able to see old King Thor face off against the mighty Galactus at some point or another.
It's main event time.
Planet Hulk. Although not very subtle, the inspiration for one of the locations featured within Thor Ragnarok's plot is actually from a widely popular comic book storyline known as Planet Hulk. Due to certain film rights to characters within the Fantastic Four and X-Men franchises, it would be quite complicated to have Planet Hulk on the big screen. Sakaar is the planet that Thor found himself on after Hela got the best of him in their battle. However, after the events of Avengers Age of Ultron, Hulk's Quinjet also crash-landed on Sakaar. This led the Hulk to become the Green Scar and a celebrated gladiator within the Grandmaster's Colosseum. However, one big difference is that Green Scar within the comic book story sought freedom and wanted no part of being a gladiator, while Hulk within the film actually enjoyed beating the pulp out of other gladiators for the amusement of the crowds. One may notice that the armor pieces that Green Scar wore within the comic book is also very similar to that of Hulk's in the movie. Heck, even the initial fight in the Planet Hulk animated film has Hulk face off against a worthy friend and rival of Thor, that being Beta Ray Bill, who, shockingly enough, is also teased within the film.
Oh, Thor. Want to use a big wooden fork?
Arena Champions. Remember that we mentioned Beta Ray Bill being teased within the film? Well, he is not the only character who is briefly shown. If you pay attention to the Grandmaster's tower, you will see the 4 faces of former champions that fought in the arena before Thor and Hulk did. Beta Ray Bill has longtime connections to not only Asgard, but also Thor, as their battle led Bill to become the worthy wielder of Stormbreaker, a hammer similar to that of Mjolnir. The other faces belong to that of Ares, the Greek god of war, Bi-Beast, a dangerous two-faced android, and the Man-Thing. These characters are not strangers to the Hulk, because he has fought against Ares and the Bi-Beast several times. Even the Man-Thing has gotten the best of the Hulk before. The question does arise, though. Will we ever get to see these bizarre and mysterious characters on the big screen? Will Beta Ray Bill fight alongside Thor Odin's son in the battle against Thanos, the Mad Titan, in Avengers Infinity War? Will Thor get to wield the Stormbreaker after losing his iconic Mjolnir hammer? Only time will tell as to what characters will actually partake in one of Marvel's biggest films yet.
Wait, you're not going to face him, are you?
Yes, I am.
Gorr the God Butcher. Gorr the God Butcher is definitely not a well-known Marvel villain, but he is by far one of the most dangerous opponents that Thor had ever faced. Gorr earned his title by slaying pantheons of gods across several timelines, which eventually led him to fight against and even defeat Thor.
What?
As we went over before, Thor's status as king and appearance were inspired by the storyline depicted in Thor God of Thunder. When the eye patch-wearing old King Thor had to protect the Earth from the clutches of Galactus, he discovered the power of the Necro Sword. The Necro Sword gives the user the ability to create a wide array of weapons and even armor. Hela is seen crafting swords, blades, and other sorts of weaponry when she fights against the Asgardian army, Thor, and even Surtur at the end of the film. When Gorr finds himself fighting against Thors from several timelines, he showcases the same abilities that Hela did as well. Additionally, Thor Ragnarok's producer Brad Winderbaum revealed that Gorr was definitely an inspiration for Cate Blanchett's portrayal of Hela in the film. Even though Gorr himself wasn't in Thor Ragnarok, at least one aspect of his character was shown through Hela.
What are you exactly?
The Celestials. The Celestials are a mysterious yet ancient race which were teased all the way back in the 2014 film Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. When the Collector spoke about the nature and origin of the Infinity Stones, we could see a celestial being showcased. Additionally, nowhere is a mining facility which is actually the severed head of a Celestial. However, a Celestial was also teased briefly in Thor Ragnarok. When the Grandmaster is witnessing the battle between Thor and Hulk in the Gladiator Arena, one can see the costume of what seems to be a celestial being. The Celestials within the comic books play important roles in seeking out worthy civilizations to help them advance, or in the case of the Collector's flashback, seek out civilizations to destroy using the Infinity Stones.
There's a little pee coming out of me right now.
Although we have yet to see a living Celestial on screen, with the exception of Ego and Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, it is very likely that they will become involved alongside the abstract entities when they fight against Thanos in Infinity War's second part. Question is, however, will Marvel have the intention to actually show the Celestials in their true power and glory?
Loki, my boy.
Asgardian play. One of the most hilarious scenes throughout Thor Ragnarok is undoubtedly the play dubbed The Tragedy of Loki. In the events of Thor the Dark World, Loki fools Thor into thinking that he had sacrificed himself to save Thor's life. This death not only fooled Thor, but also the audience.
Hurts, doesn't it?
Loki is not called the God of Mischief for nothing.
Piss off, Ghost!
It is revealed at the end of the film that Loki was actually pretending to be Odin and left his adopted father on Earth. This play-pretend trick by Loki was soon unveiled by Thor, which jump-started the plot of the movie to seek out Odin. Within the play, Loki mentions how he turned Thor into a frog when they were younger. Shockingly, this is actually a nod to Throg, a frog with the powers of Thor, which debuted back in 1986. However, the best part about this scene is the actors who play the characters' parts. Loki is played by none other than Matt Damon, while Thor is played by Chris Hemsworth's real-life older brother, Luke Hemsworth. Curiously enough, Sam Neill plays the part of Odin, which is coincidental because Sam's Jurassic Park co-star Jeff Goldblum is also in the film. Talk about a jam-packed cameo scene.
Hey, Nick.
The Warbound. Planet Hulk not only inspired the setting of Sakaar for Thor Ragnarok, but also introduced us to some members of the Warbound.
Over here. Pile of rocks waving at you. Here.
Korg is the clear and uncontested comedic relief within the film who is inseparable from Meek, his sidekick. However, within the Planet Hulk storyline, Korg and Meek play very different roles. Hulk meets them in the Gladiator Arena alongside the rest of the Warbound. They form a sort of familiar bond after they help Hulk defeat the Silver Surfer, who was the Grandmaster, the Red King's champion champion in the comic book storyline. After Hulk and the Warbound obtain their freedom, they find themselves traveling to the Earth to fight the Earth's heroes alongside the Hulk. Although a World War Hulk story on the big screen seems very unlikely for now, the Marvel Cinematic Universe found a good way to introduce more than just one of Planet Hulk's elements. Those who loved the tear-jerking yet hilarious one-liners from the duo are in for a treat, as Thor Ragnarok's Taika Waititi has mentioned that a spin-off feature for those two characters has been talked about. Why, thank you. So, hopefully, this may not be the last we see of those characters.
Odin's treasure.
Odin's trophies. Those who have seen the very first Thor film, which debuted in 2011, may remember a very brief Easter egg that hinted at the Infinity Gauntlet we will see Thanos obliterate the Avengers with this April. However, this is contradictory due to seeing Thanos equip himself with the Infinity Gauntlet in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron end credits scene. Also, due to all the Infinity Stones being scattered. For instance, the Tesseract is, or well, was, in Asgard. The Collector has the Reality Gem. The Power Gem is on Xandar. Doctor Strange has the Time Gem. And finally, the Mind Gem is literally a part of Vision. Plus, the one in Odin's trophy room was adorned with almost all of them. However, Thor Ragnarok essentially further made it clear that the Infinity Gauntlet that is within Odin's collection is actually fake, as are many other things within it. Seeing Hela knock over the gauntlet is not only humorous, but her comment regarding the collectibles fixes a continuity error within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Talk about a retcon. Fortunately...